All right, welcome to Cranbox Weekly Interview Edition, where we go beyond the headlines to break down the systems, decisions, and people shaping our country. I'm Carl Abel, founder of Cranbox Politics, and this show is built on a simple idea. If you want to understand what is happening in America, you have to understand how it actually works. Here we sit down with experts, advocates, and voices from across the political spectrum to challenge assumptions, explore trade offs, and dig into the mechanics of governance, policy, and power. No talking points, no partisan spin, just real conversations about the issues that matter. Let's get into it. Today's conversation is about power, law, and the meaning of rights in America. And joining us is Evan Turk, a former Trump affiliated attorney and now CEO of the American Rights Alliance. He's been inside the room where legal strategy and political reality collide. So the question today is simple. When we talk about rights, are we talking about principle or are we talking about power? Evan, thank you for coming on the show, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion.
Thank you for having me, Carl.
What I want to do is, because this is the one thing that everyone's going to want to know, right? Is the Trump connection. So I'll just start off with one real quick question, and we'll go from there. At what point does legal advocacy for a client cross into enabling behavior that undermines democratic norms? And did you ever feel close to that while working in Trump orbit?
First question. It's as a member of the bar who takes my oath very seriously. It's my livelihood. Fortunately, there's an ethics department within the state of Florida, the Florida Bar. So if you ever have any questions, and you know what's right or wrong, but there's gray how you could handle this or that. You have the bar and the support of the bar, the rules of the bar, and sometimes ethics is not what is right or wrong. It's what the Florida Bar has defined as right and wrong. So the first question is that, you're not here on your own island. You also could work with other attorneys, but sometimes those attorneys their interests aren't aligned with yours. So you really have to, create the foundation that you could practice tomorrow because you're no good to anybody. I have a family. You're no good to your family if you can't support yourself. And the second question, and I guess the main thrust of the question was, there wasn't anything I felt that was inappropriate or uncomfortable, especially knowing that every single decision you make, every move you make is going to be criticized. It's going to not be objective. It's going to be completely opinionated. It's directed at finding a resolution that is against your client's best interest in your own livelihood. I've worked with Peter Tickton. He was President Trump's friend from military school, the New York Academy. The brave, the confidence this person has, but he's also now 80 years old. So his livelihood isn't as long and necessary as mine, but the bravery he has had to see the level of bar complaints he has by just taking a hard decision, but having enough common sense and facts and supporting law behind it to justify. But that doesn't mean the courts are going to agree with you, and often they don't.
So you never at any point had a concern where there was a conflicting within you, like a moral confliction of, this is kind of crossing the line. It's in the gray area. I don't know if this is something that I want to put my career on the line for. You never had that type of experience?
Not in the work that I've done, no. I know that a lot of problems that have transpired were due to the election and the integrity of our election system. And there were a lot of irregularities that were questioned. And that was really conflicting and a very complicated situation because you know what you're supposed to do as an attorney and question things when things don't add up. And it's difficult when you have not only a media that's out to label or misalign, confuse, obfuscate what is really going on in the questions, and therefore saying that you are an election denier or you're this or you're that. And I think that was the biggest hurdle for a lot of attorneys working for Trump because there are blurred lines there. And, you look at someone like Rudy Giuliani, he was an amazing, incredible mayor of New York. And before that, he took down the mob. I mean, a great attorney at some point lost his legal license. I mean, that's kind of scary just because you are following what you think is right. And that's when politics and the law conflict. And sometimes if you're not on the popular side or the more powerful side of the political aisle, your legal license is in jeopardy. And it's scary. It's scary now that there are certain states in this country that are, in my opinion, weaponizing lawyers and going against them. It's basically taking away your freedom of speech, and it's also taking away people's rights to zealous avocation and to have an advocate to protect you and to support you. You know how many lawyers I have come across that have told me, I believe in everything you're doing. I just can't do it or my law firm won't allow me. And that's a shame. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're on the left or the right, in order to get and resolve an issue, you should have access to adequate counsel. And when people have blacklisted a lot of, people for the fact that they're aligned with a political opinion or ideology that may not necessarily be against what they're thinking, but they think that there's a consequence to taking that opinion, and that's a problem.
So I would imagine that based off of your response there, that you are not in favor of the executive orders that President Trump released early on in his tenure when he was making it so that members of certain law firms could not enter federal buildings and pressuring them to bend to his will and give him money, give him access to their legal teams in order to provide him and the government free legal services in order to retain the ability to enter government buildings and provide the counsel to their clients should their clients retain them. I mean, that right there to me seems like a textbook example of what lawfare looks like when it comes to applying political pressure upon those individuals who are political opponents or seen as a political opponent.
You know, I don't know exactly which or what you're stating, because this is not something that I'm extremely familiar with. This executive order might be a little mischaracterized, or I may see it differently, but it doesn't matter on what side of the aisle. You take away the politics. You have this thing called a constitution, and then you really have to make sure that justice is served for all, not just for those on your political side. So I guess to answer your question is, if I could see the executive order, look at the facts, and come up with an opinion, often the information is misleading to one persuasion or the next. So you really can't state an objective opinion on something. Rather, you're looking at it from one side of the aisle, only one perception, because you want the outcome to be one way or the other, or it aligns with what you think is happening. So you're kind of blinded by your own bias. So I can't really opine on that statement because I don't know what the executive order you're really truly referencing.
Well, there were three of them, and I don't have them readily available to throw them at you. And if I did, I'd probably give you the number, and that wouldn't help you as we're on the show right now. But I'll work on getting at least the numbers to you so you can review them after the show. Essentially, what happened is they were all focused on attorneys and law firms that participated in the investigations into January 6th, into the election fraud scheme, the fake electors that were established. So all of those things were being investigated, and those attorneys were part of the process. And when President Trump got into office, one of the first things that he did was sign those executive orders. But like I said, after the show, I'll get those to you so you can read through them.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, from your perspective, and I'm not trying to like drive you into a corner, right? And this is just me sitting here watching, and I'm not a legal person. I don't claim to be a legal expert, but I do have a good feel for the Constitution. And what I've seen is a lot of things that are occurring or that have occurred during his second term seem to be extra constitutional. The establishment of Doge, the closure of USAID, the demolishing of the East Wing. All of those things seem to be extra judicial, or excuse me, extra constitutional when it comes to the way that those things are supposed to be done, right? Congress mandates funding for programs. The president can't just go in there and willy nilly say, never mind, we're not going to fund this. From your perspective, is that like my view? Is my view correct, or am I off base with that point of view?
I love the question, and there's various rabbit holes I could go down. I'll try not to. I would rather make this as simple to the Constitution, the core of the essence of what our founding fathers envisioned when creating the Constitution. I see that there are powers in the government, no matter if you're a Democrat or a Republican, who have, and this is over the years through acts of Congress, that you have unelected officials that have more power than elected officials. So the will of the people is taken away because we have people who can basically control billions, if not trillions of dollars, and not even be accountable for where that money goes to. And a lot of this money went to NGOs, and a lot of this money went to political partisan groups, one of which is we knew Biden left, the lady who lost as governor of Georgia, I can't think of her name right now, created a charity and billions of dollars were funneled through there. That's government waste. And I think Doge was a great concept to identify government waste and expose where our money is truly going. And US aid and all these organizations, they're extremely partisan. They're not bipartisan. And there's ways to funnel money to special interest groups. At the end of the day, I'm looking, how do we help Americans? How do we help people that are busting their every day just to live paycheck to paycheck? And how is the government, with the use of its funds, helping those people rather than funneling that money to special interests? And then where's the outrage when money is wasted in the excess of billions of dollars? For example, you take Somalians, refugees in Minnesota right now, it's $4.3 billion, something to that effect. Don't quote me on that exact dollar figure because we don't know what the exact dollar figure is. And then you have to ask, how does the government get so large and incompetent that such an exorbitant amount of money can go to special groups or special acts that, in Minnesota, the governor knew that, or from what I understand, had knowledge of it, but didn't want to bring attention to it because of fear of the optics. That's, there's a lot to that question. And I'm hoping I'm not going down, like I said, the rabbit hole. But at what point do we say enough's enough? Like, why are we funneling money to these special interest groups? And what are we getting in return for this? Why are we putting hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars to other countries to do things that are so crazy and it defies common sense? And so maybe the way Doge was enacted may not have been the most direct way. Maybe it should have been done through acts of Congress. But the problem we have with Congress right now, it's the same problem we have with politics. It's so bipartisan that nothing gets done. All they do is have meetings and sound bites to support their special interests. Frustrating. You talk about a lack of competency. Go to DC and look at what's going on every day in Congress and asking yourself, why isn't anything getting done? We can't even balance a budget. And then you have people on both sides of the aisle blaming the other party. And there's no decency and there's no middle ground anymore.
So I heard on everything, right? And what I want to do is I want to go back to the small real quick,
Mhm.
and clarify a few things there, and then jump to the Congress piece, and then maybe talk about the will of the people at the end of it. So the Somali situation, so far 78 people have been charged. And that investigation actually started under President Biden during the COVID crisis. And so I believe a large number of those 78 people that were charged were, for lack of a better term, white American citizens that were taking advantage of the system, right? So what I would argue there is that that's not necessarily an issue where the government is trying to cover it up or the government is incompetent. That is a prime example of what happens when the government is competent. They find the fraud, right? Because you're never going to be able to prevent things from happening, and you always have to be prepared to investigate instances that seem fishy. At the same time, I would say that the governor of Minnesota was aware of it, but he may not have had, and this is just me postulating, but he may not have had the ability to speak on it because of the fact that it was an ongoing investigation. So I would argue that the Minnesota scenario or the Minnesota situation is a classic example of what happens when government does work. To your point of
Okay, let me
Congress,
stop you here. I
yeah,
don't
go ahead.
understand that. If you, when government does work? How's $4.3 billion stolen from the government make sense that this is an example of when the government does work?
Because it was caught, right? So the fact of the matter is that there was an investigation that went into effect. The fact of the matter is that the government did its oversight job and ensured that it identified this fraud situation. That's what I mean, right? So when we look at these cases and we look at the fact that the government has found or the government is charging, that's not an example of a failure. It's an example of the government identifying people who are taking advantage of the system,
But how was
right?
it
Like,
found? Was it the government found it, or was it reporters and people questioning and bring it to the attention that the government couldn't look the other way and try to bury the lead? I
yeah.
mean, at
So it
what
was a
point you're talking $4.3 billion, like that's $4,300 million. I mean, at some point, a government should be completely incompetent when they're spending that type of money and not knowing that it's going, not even visiting these clearing centers as they were even, written there. I mean, the IRS, for example, the day you die, they know that the Social Security knows to cut off your payment. That's a system that seems to be working, right? I mean, there's ways that you can get protocol. I mean, how do you give away such money? Same thing with COVID dollars and all the things that they create these programs, but they don't put mechanisms in place. It's common sense to deter the fraud until $4.3 billion is lost. I mean,
Right. So the investigation started in 2020 by the state of Minnesota itself, right? They flagged it because the claims weren't the smell test just wasn't right. Like it smelled fishy. So the state started to investigate. And then they started to compile a lot of details. And then what happened is that the nonprofit that the state flagged went to court and got an injunction for relief, which meant that the state couldn't, and you know this better than me, and
mhm.
so if I'm wrong on what this means, correct me, but it meant that the state couldn't continue its process and that nonprofit could continue to receive and utilize those funds. And then in 2021, the FBI got involved. And that's where things started to turn around. So at the end of the day, again, it was an example, a prime example of the government doing its due diligence and providing oversight and catching this situation when it happened and how it happened.
I just think that government's not doing its job on $4.3 billion. At some point, maybe if it was a couple $1 million, at some point you got to look and enact, mechanisms in place before you give out and distribute these types of funds for fraud in an instant injunction once you have X, Y, Z happening. I mean, it's the same thing with COVID dollars. They had no protocol in there. They just gave it out, even though that they were aware that there was going to be some great fraud. It wasn't going to the people, it was going to those who knew and wanted, and found the abilities to get access. It wasn't distributed fairly, it was distributed quickly and without really any rhyme or reason. I mean,
Right.
where
But
is
that
the
all,
accountability? But the problem is the same thing that happens time and again. They will find somebody on the lower level, make that person go to jail for life. But the people who really have caused the problems, they get off. I mean, this is what happens time and again. I can give you example after example, and we sweep it under the carpet. I mean, the same thing with Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, this is going to be completely swept under the carpet. I mean, this is a bipartisan issue. But we know that there was a lot of things happening that were illegal, that were, disgusting at best, and yet things just seem to disappear. That's the questions that we have. So we can go down one rabbit hole about the Medicaid fraud or the Jeffrey Epstein case or Doge and the use of the money that was going into all these special interests. But at the end of the day, it's like we have all this great revenue sources that should be distributed in a way that can reach the people, in a way that we can encourage, you know, a safe society, a fair society, a one that's free for all people, that are open to just certain people because they check a box. And at the end of the day, what I'm fighting for is to have a country worth fighting for, where it's founded on the governing principles of our founding fathers, on family, on faith, and on freedom. And I'm looking at what's going on all of these things, especially when you mention Doge, or especially like when you mention What happened in Minnesota, it's, the American dream, the people who are living the American dream are the ones that are getting screwed. Part of my language. Every dollar that they make is taxed at record numbers because somebody has to pay the piper. And depending on what state you're living, it could be over 50%. And this is not the system that is working most effectively or efficiently for us. So when you question things such as Doge and you're not outraged, or a $4.3 billion fraud and you're not outraged, and that's the problem. Where is the outrage? There is none. I mean, it's just swept under the carpet and saying, oh, the government was working. It found it. Well, it could have taken 10 years for it to find it at $4.3 billion. I don't think that's accountable. Kind of like when your car breaks down and the systems keep telling you, check engine lights on, you need gas, this. And then all of a sudden the car breaks down and you're in the middle of the road and you're in an unsafe situation. At what point, do you stop the car and get it checked and make the improvements, keep it safe? I mean,
So, if I may interrupt you, just using your analogy, right?
mhm.
When it comes to the car being our nation, our government, how it functions, the lights that pop up are the investigations that are occurring. And I don't want to get tangled around the axle on Somalia because that's one of those things that not all the facts have come out yet. But what we do know is that within a matter of 2 to 3 years, they were able to catch that and start the prosecution process. And so what I'll say is that those warning lights are going off. I agree with you. And there needs to be reform. 100% agree with you. But Article 1 gives Congress the power of the purse,
Mhm.
right? And so Congress has the authority. Congress, in reality, per the Constitution, is the will of the people, not the president. And so when it comes to how our government is supposed to function, again, correct me if I'm wrong, Congress needs to get its head back on its shoulders and start doing their damn job. Because what is occurring and what has been occurring for the last several decades is that the executive office has been increasingly garnering and adding to its power sources in a one-way manner. And so at the end of the day, what I point to, and the reason that I call this out and I call Trump out, or excuse me, President Trump out, is because of the fact that it seems like that power grab is increasingly accelerating during this current term. And it drives a lot of concern for me when it comes to the fact that we've got election season coming up and our president has spoken about wanting to nationalize the election system. What are your thoughts on that? Where do you see his ability to do that?
I don't want to even call it nationalized, the election system, but just bring common sense back into it. You have in 2020 COVID or one issue or the next, and everyone's doing these paper ballots, and we don't know who's really voting. I mean, the purpose of being an American citizen, it's the most fundamental right of being an American is to be able to vote, to be able to have your vote count. And when somebody has the ability to make your vote not count because of the fraud in the system, and we want to curtail the fraud in the system, and everyone acts as if we are, our IQ is below 80 and we don't have any common sense, and the undertones of racism in this that you hear as the justification for the reason why they're doing things the way that they are doing it. And then all of a sudden you have states that say that there are certain groups of people that are not smart enough or incapable of getting valid identification so that they can vote. Well, you don't have to show a ID to vote, and you could even do this by mail, and you don't even have to show up. We don't have a democracy. I mean, obviously we're a republic, but our vote doesn't count as much as it once did because we don't even know who's voting. I mean, and they don't clean the reels, the voter reels. So you have all these people who are on the system, how many people were over 120 that were still in the voter reels? But getting back to this, I mean, it's common sense. I mean, it's just most fundamental. You need to be a U.S. citizen over 18 or 18 and over to vote. And you must be able to show that you are the person you're claiming that you are in the voting booth. I mean, what is the argument against that? I can't fathom that. It lacks common sense. And the only reason I know my truth, unfortunately, it might not be others, but the way I believe and I see things, I know It's one party says, we know that there's fraud in the system, and that fraud in the system gives us a competitive advantage. And we need to create this dialogue of and go a falsity of what it's truly about, and create a false narrative to make it sound like it's, anti-American, to do something that is the opposite. It's truly American. My vote should count because I'm a U.S. citizen. Your vote should count because you're a U.S. citizen. Somebody who comes into this country or that doesn't have a form of identification should not be able to vote. And they're trying to curtail that. And it's unfathomable how people could say they're against that. They're against making your vote count for citizens and taking away people who are going to fraud the system. Keep everyone accountable. How do you vote without an ID? You can't get a driver's license. I mean, you can't drive a car without an ID. You can't go fly without an ID. You can't get a cell phone without an ID. You can't get a job without an ID. I don't understand this argument. It is highly illogical, and you're being lied to because they're saying the undertones of racism, which is racist in of itself, that people of minority stature are not smart enough or capable enough to get an ID. You're just insinuating racism when it doesn't exist to justify your cause. Disgusting. It's just, I just don't understand it. And I've tried. I mean, I've gone on AI and I say, okay, give me the alternate version of this. This is my belief system. Tell me why I'm wrong. Because I want to know why I'm wrong. I want to know what people on the other side of the aisle thinks. And there's certain things, a few things that I truly can't understand. And this is one of them. Squatter rights is another. But most of everything else, I could understand the other side. I could understand the side of being pro-life. I could understand the side of being pro-choice. I could be on I could understand why somebody becomes a Democrat and hates or dislikes the foundation of the Republican Party, and vice versa. But there's certain things that is wrong, and this to me makes no sense. And if you are voting for somebody who's going to be in federal office, it is the federal government's job to make sure that the people in office are the ones who got voted in. I mean, I just don't understand how you could argue otherwise. And please tell me why I'm wrong, because I don't understand.
Okay, so I'll start with your last point, right? Voting is a responsibility, or managing the voting is a responsibility of the states, not the federal government. And that's in the Constitution. The Congress has the authority to make alterations and say, hey, you will do this. That's how we wound up with November general elections nationwide. But the states have authority over elections unless Congress dictates alterations. So that's point number one. Point number two is that according to the Constitution, the president has zero authority over elections. Zero, none. He has no power whatsoever. So by my understanding, any type of executive order that he would issue about voting, including mail-in voting, is null and void because the Constitution doesn't give him that authority. And then point three is that Congress is currently debating the SAVE Act, right? And the SAVE Act is about voter ID and voter registration. Now, I was a registered Republican. I am currently a registered Democrat. And I became a registered Democrat because I did not believe that the Republican Party was operating in good faith in the manner that I joined them for, right? They weren't aligning with my personal values. And so I joined the Democratic Party because they have my values a little bit closer. But to me, neither party is a valid organization within the greater scheme of things. And I think that if we could, we should get rid of the party system. But more importantly, right, looking at the 2020 elections, there were less than 475 potential cases of fraud. There were 25 plus million votes. That comes out to about 0.0002% of votes cast that were fraudulent. 0.0002%, which makes it.
Here's
Go
the
ahead.
problem, and I'm sorry, Carl, to interrupt, but when those things, the fraud, there's a lot more fraud, and we are pursuing this and we're fighting this, and you'll hopefully see when you don't have access to showing and common sense, and you can't use the courts the right way because of standing and procedures rather than facts and evidence. There is a lot more. I mean, we are working on those things, but every time you come across it, you get shut down. And a perfect parallel analogy is when the Biden computer got exposed, and it was right before the election, and everybody said that that was fake news when the New York Post reported it, which basically influenced the election. I mean, it was a very close election, or could have been, should have been, but that could have been all you needed for to take one position versus the other candidate's position. But yet they said with full evidence that it was actually a true story, they got banned on all sources of media. And if you posted about it on Facebook, on Instagram, on any other social media, or dared to put it out there in the news, you were blacklisted. And then years later, you find out that was all true, and they knew it to be true. That was voter fraud in and of itself, because they eliminated people from making an educated decision about who the next president was going to be based upon evidence that was truthful and factual. The thing that I have a problem is when people say these certainties, there's a lot that I know and I've seen and I've witnessed. I can show you fraud after fraud after fraud that it will blow your mind. Statistical anomalies that would make no sense whatsoever. So to say that there was no fraud, there was rampant fraud in the system. It's just that they have been able to keep that and curtail that to a point where we look, people who question it are blacklisted in society because we can't even say it because we're not considered reputable, and we can't make a position or even take a position to say, hey, I'm going to want to state this for the record on a major news outlet. And you believe that the voter system was fraudulent, and you don't believe that the 2020 election actually was truthful. No, we can't have you. We don't like your position. So people have told me time and again, like, I agree with what you're saying, but I can't take that position publicly. The statistics that you have or the information you have is presented in a very biased position because of who's funding the information and how the courts work. And you can't get standing, you can't have your day in court, even though the evidence could blow your mind. We're working on that. Not me, but people that I know that have helped my organization out. They're working on that. And the things that I've witnessed and seen, you can't argue with that. It just defies common sense. But if they're wrong, and they're not, but if they are wrong, let them have their day in court where it can be publicized and the information can be out there instead of lost on lack of standing or procedural issues. Not on the
So,
substance, but on the procedures.
so continuing my statistics here, there were 60 plus lawsuits that challenged the 2020 election. Almost all of them were dismissed for lack of evidence. There were multiple recounts and audits, and every single one of those recounts and audits confirmed the original results.
Let me explain to you how that worked. So one of the systems, one of the positions that we have good evidence to support this. Again, I'm not talking in absolutes here, and I don't want to seem like I know this to be 100% true, but this is what was presented to me, is that they had a system in place that they were able to take out the votes and basically through the system replace it with pretty much a clone voting data and then switch it back. But when you look at the numbers, it's the same votes and it's the same numbers. And when you look at the votes and you look at the paper ballots, you're not looking at the signatures because that page is not there. You're just looking at blank voter documents. So it was very easy to manipulate and very easy to protect and take away where the fraud was. It's a very complicated process, and I'm trying to explain that in a very short period of time is nearly impossible, but it's concerning, and yet nobody wants to hear it because it's a inconvenient truth. And if it's not an inconvenient truth, because I don't want to speak with absolutes and certainties, and let's say I'm wrong, at least it should be presented. But you don't get to that level because you're never able to present that evidence because the courts will kick it out because various things. I mean, just to have your day in court should be heard. And you should say, okay, let the public know what the evidence that we have is so that we can make a decision. Let us look crazy if we're wrong. I mean, and again, I'm not saying with certainty that you're wrong, you're right, you're wrong, and I'm right. I'm just questioning how we got there and how the media is able to construe facts in a way where it makes it seem extremely likely in one side and extremely highly unlikely in the other side. And yet over time things happen and you find out, like Russian collusion, that there wasn't any Russian collusion. So at what point? And nobody gets in trouble. And that's the issue. It's like it was 2020. It was too long ago. Nobody cares anymore. But if we could go back and really identify all the things, and if you could do this objectively and get the evidence and be able to subpoena the records and deal with all these things that question why things have happened the way they were. For example, why were voter reels required to be deleted, the voting records? When the federal law says the voting records aren't allowed to be deleted, why did states like Colorado intentionally delete the records? Why would they do that? But is that evidence to support your case? No, but it's evidence to question why would you delete records that could be used in the future to support that there might have been fraud? Why were they why are people in jail for trying to be a whistleblower so that information can get protected and seen? I mean, to me, that's the evidence nobody gets to hear. Like, and those people who question that, we're helping out. They're in jail right now, and they're called election deniers. And maybe they're wrong,
So
but
that
their
that kind of
questions
shifts
aren't
us into
answered.
to Tina Peters territory, right?
Yeah,
And I mean, your organization claims that Tina Peters is a political prisoner, but she was accused of breaching policy, right? Like she was accused of leaking information, of accessing data and information that was not allowed for her to access, and is why she was charged and held accountable, right? And to your point about Colorado deleting records, they didn't delete records. Now in 2021, the Mesa County voting systems underwent a trusted build, but nothing was deleted. It was all still there. Some of the system data was overwritten, but the voter data wasn't. The voter data was still there. And I will go even one step further. I personally think that we should pass laws in states that make it so that voters can go back and verify the way that they voted. Right? I live in North Carolina. I can go see and verify that I voted, but I can't actually click on it and see my ballot and verify that my ballot was my ballot and that's the way that I voted. Now, there's a lot of privacy and concerns about that. Like, how do you verify that you are who you are when you log into the system?
right.
But I think that that's one way to reestablish trust. But to
Mhm.
claim that roles were deleted in Colorado is a false claim, because that's not exactly what happened. And I would argue that that claim is made on a bias level, because there is an effort to find anything and everything to point to the fact that there was fraud in the 2020 elections, despite all of the facts and the data and the statistics that prove otherwise.
So do you think someone like Tina Peters, 70-year-old woman with no criminal history whatsoever, deserves to be in jail for pretty much the rest of her life, statistically speaking, a 7, 8 year sentence?
Did she violate the law?
Well, did you go over 55 once and violate the law? I'm not asking, if the law is unjust. I mean, do you think 7, 8 years, when you could, in some cases, murder someone and get a lesser sentence? The thing is, the question I'm asking, do you think a woman, 70 years old with no criminal record, thinking that she was doing the right thing because of voter suppression and preserving the record, deserves to live the rest of her life in jail in not even a 6 by 8 cell? I think it's a 3 by 5, um, which was a closet that she's there. She can't even stand up if her roommate is standing up. Do you think that's the way we treat people in just society? And respond as well, did she break the law? I mean, if you go back to every single American, I could find one day, one time they've broken the law and they can get in trouble for it. And to say, well, did they break the law? Well, I don't know. I mean, do you think Roger Stone broke the law? Because I think he would have been in jail for 8 years based on Russian collusion that didn't exist. I mean, did Hillary Clinton break the law? I don't know, when she decided to target Donald Trump and to create a report that can be used against him for Russian collusion, I think she should have, by the same standard you just said. Did she break the law? Why isn't she in jail? Justice for all. So it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't pass the smell test. And when it's all said and done, The biggest concern is not when it's on my side. It's what we want to fight when it's on the other side as well, because it could just the pendulum can swing so quickly. And if we're okay with it, it's in our interest, and we're against it when it's not serving our interests, that pendulum's going to swing. I just want justice for all. And I just think that it's people are treated completely different, and that's the weaponization that I'm trying to fight. Because I want to make sure that the best candidate's going to go run for office and not have to fear that they're going to go to jail because you have the other side that's going to look and find things to criminal that individual for. And then say, well, did they break the law? Well, did they even know they were breaking the law? I mean, is the law just and fair? And what was the law that they broke?
And yet, this administration continuously demonstrates a willingness to prosecute its political opponents. I mean, we talked about Tina Peters. You made the comment about how she lives in a 3x5 cell and she broke the law. But, I say, hey, did she break the
I
law? And
don't.
your
I don't
response
think she
was,
broke the law. I
well,
don't think she broke the law.
let me finish. My response was, did she break the law? And your response to that was, well, is it just? Well, is it just that an undocumented immigrant family is put in a similar 5 cell, if they're lucky, or in a warehouse in order to be shipped off without due process? We're talking about two very different things. Like that undocumented immigrant family didn't break the law. They're not criminals, and they're getting rolled up like
What do
criminals
you
and put
mean they
into
didn't,
warehouses.
Carl?
Whereas Tina Peters violated the law, was found guilty by a jury of her peers, and was sentenced by the justice system. I would argue that that is a demonstration of how justice works,
But
right?
let me
On the point
stop
of
you
Hillary
here,
Clinton,
though, Carl. I'm sorry, but I just don't understand. You said they didn't break the law, these undocumented. Let's actually use common sense. This is what drives me nuts, because we changed the narrative so that it doesn't seem like there's a crime caused undocumented. No, they're illegal Americans. They're illegal aliens. I mean, they're illegal aliens. They came to this country. Like I didn't go to Canada or Mexico and seize the benefits of living in that country without permission, and then get caught and then become the victim here. I mean, the victim are the family members, because they don't really have a decision. But at some point, someone decided to break the law to come to this country illegally, and that's breaking the law. And yet we call them undocumented citizens. They're criminals. They broke the law. There's a law that says they're not allowed to do it. They broke the law, but we reward them. So we give them incentives to do it, and we don't even look at it as breaking the law. And if that's the case, then Congress can change the law and say anybody can live in this society. You don't need any passports. You could even vote, because you don't even need in certain states to prove that you're a citizen, because that's racist. I mean, at some point, we don't become a civilized society when people are committing crimes, but we change the definitions so that we soften it. And then we put other people to 7, 8 years of jail. Let's say Tina Peters did break the law. 7 to 8 years of jail. What is the purpose? Is it to stop her from committing another crime? Or is it to make a statement to society that if you do something that we disagree with, not only are we going to put you behind bars, but we're going to put you behind bars for an exceptionally long period of time. And yet there's no outrage there. 7 or 8 years? I mean, for a 70-year-old woman, that's a life sentence. I mean, maybe a probation, maybe restitution, but 7 to 8 years? I mean, even if I don't see it that she broke the law, I think she is a whistleblower. Even if I concede to the fact that she broke the law, 7 to 8 years, there's no outrage because she's on the other political side. I mean, I would feel outraged if it was somebody on the other side that got 7 to 8 years. I would say, this is ridiculous. This is not a just society. This is not a society that I'm proud to live in, to think that I'm treated fairly. And even if I make a mistake, my life is now over for that mistake. And I thought with all intentions that I was doing the right thing. I mean, at some point, people, especially on one side of the political aisle, they're so sympathetic for certain groups of people, and just the opposite for the other side of people. They pick and choose which people and what crimes are okay and what crimes are inappropriate, and they should go to jail for the rest of their lives and throw away the key. And it's based upon for one simple thing, their political opinion. And that's the essence of what I'm trying to accomplish as a charity is to take away people's um, ability to punish, not because of a crime, but because of their political ideology. Because at some point you lose your freedom of speech, and that is loss of freedom of speech. And it's so infuriating. And we talk about it. This is a woman's life. I mean, this is a woman who has never committed any act of crime whatsoever. She was trying to do what she thought. Maybe she did something wrong. She didn't have the intent to do it wrong. She wasn't thinking she was doing anything wrong. But the rest of her life now, dealing with COPD in a cell of 3x5, I mean, dealing with the things that she gets attacked. I mean, where is the outrage? There is none, because she's on a political side that you're the antagonist of. Understood. And this is my point. Thank you.
Again, I'm not trying to be hostile, right? Based off of my knowledge of the case. And I'm an intel analyst, right? Or I was an intel analyst. And we took security very seriously. We had badges. If the badge got lost, man, listen, like everything went to hell, because there was no way that you were losing that badge. If you lost your ID, absolutely someone was coming after you. We took it very seriously, and I still take it very seriously. Tina Peters gave unauthorized access to the systems. Tina Peters knowingly granted a badge, or gave a badge to someone who was not authorized to have a badge, to give them access to that system. So at the end of the day, Tina Peters knew what she was doing. She knew that it violated the laws and the rules and the statutes. She knew that she was in the wrong, right? So I'm with you on the fact that she's 70 years old and she got 7 to 8 years. That's basically a lifetime for her, right? If you compare that to Ghislaine Maxwell, who went from a high security prison to a low security prison and is basically at a camp where she can do whatever she wants and has work release, right? And her violations of the law were much worse than what Tina Peters did, right? I would say that is a better comparison there, where I would rightly be on your side and outraged at the fact that Tina Peters is getting treated worse than Ghislaine Maxwell, right? That's where I would go. Now, on the line of justice for all, you can talk to a number of people, right? And I'm associated with a veteran group, and we talk about this all the time. We don't care about political alignment when it comes to prosecutions and justice. What we care about is that justice is served, right? And what we care about is ensuring that everyone gets the justice that they deserve. That includes Bill Clinton, if he was on the Epstein list. That includes Donald Trump, if he was on the Epstein list. Like all of those things, we are very focused on making sure and advocating for equal application of justice under the law, just like you are, right? But what I would argue is that when we look at it, the way that we look at it is less from a bias of political spectrum and more from a point of view of, did they break the law or did they not break the law? And if they did break the law, why aren't they being
Let
prosecuted?
me stop you here, though. If there's 50 people that break the law, but they only prosecute the 5 people that, because of their political persuasion, left or right, and your response is, did they break the law? Are you okay with that? And letting 35, 40 people, I said 50 people and only 5, so 45 people free and only charge 5. It's selective prosecution, but you could justify it by saying, well, did they break the law? Are you
Well,
okay
no,
with
because
that as a society?
everyone who breaks the law should be prosecuted, right? So
Okay, so
that between you and me, that's something that we both agree on, right? It doesn't matter whether they're politically aligned with any one
right,
party or
but
whatever.
there's a difference here, because only one of us is outraged by the political prosecutions that's happening in this country that are completely unjust, that they're only choosing selectively enforcing these people to go against, that have some sort of political agenda. And that's where I think the system is flawed right now. They're only prosecuting the people that they want to prosecute and letting the other people go. Someone like Hillary Clinton, which I just don't think she could have been prosecuted 1,000 for different crimes, give or take, figure of speech. But yet she's a freed woman and she's respected in her political group. You take Joe Biden's son, same thing. Well, if he was Donald Trump's son, they would have probably went after him. And again, if it's reverse, I'm not fighting it based on the politics side of it. I'm fighting it because of the politics, and it's infuriating. that they're only choosing to go against certain types of people and certain types of crime when it fits a specific agenda and letting other people go away scot-free. And that's the problem. And it's like that poem.
But they did prosecute Hunter Biden, right? And President Biden at the time initially said,
Wait, wait.
I will
They
not grant
waited
him
for
a
the
pardon."
statute for the serious crimes, they waited for the statute of limitations to pass so that they couldn't prosecute him on the serious crimes. And then because of the politics, they finally did on lesser crimes while Biden was in office, specifically, in my opinion, when Biden was in office, so he could do the pardon. And guess what? He did the pardon. And I don't fault him for doing that pardon. I have a child. I have two children. I would have done the same thing, but I don't fault Biden for doing that. It's your son. How are you gonna let your son, if you have the keys to the door, to get him out of jail? Why would you let him rot?
Well, I mean, I fault Biden for that, right? I do, because I've got kids, and one of my kids has been arrested and has been charged, and all that stuff, right? And if I was in a position of power where I could have stopped him from being charged, I would not have, because my son violated the law. My
Let
son
me
broke
tell
the
you
law,
something.
and that's what he needs to learn.
Let me tell you something. Everyone has an opinion. And Mike Tyson said it best. Everyone has the opinion until they get punched in the face. Until you're in that situation, you don't know how you're going to act. And I don't know if Biden truly was lying to the public about that, or it took him years later or time later to reflect as a father and say, how can I do this on my conscience with my son? And I can't fault him for not doing it. I can't fault him for doing it. Again, it's your family. It's the most important thing to your fundamental core as a human. That's what makes you human, is that you're putting your life at stake for someone else's well-being. And the only people that you do that time and time again for is either your family, or in times of war, which is your extended family. It's your camaraderie of your group, of the organization. Those are only two times. So I can't fault that. What I just infuriates me is how different people are treated in this country because they have a political opinion on one side or another, and how people can get away scot-free. I mean, you look at things that have happened historically over the years. I mean, you look at Ted Kennedy and Chappaqua. I mean, you look at all these stories and you say, how was he, given, this freedom when other people would have went to jail for a year? And that's what I'm trying to fight. And I'm not trying to put everyone in jail. I'm trying to do the opposite. I'm trying to figure out, A, is this person a risk to society? Is there a way that we could cure the problem without ruining not just his life, but his family's life? And if not, how do we protect the welfare of the country and the neighbors so that these atrocities don't happen again? I mean, that's really my fundamental core philosophy on freedom. I mean, taking away someone's freedom, it's the last option you should ever do. You're saying that they have no benefit to society and they must be punished for others to learn the lesson. And no one's learning the Tina Peters lesson and saying that if that situation presents itself, I would do it this way or that way, because she didn't have the scienter, she didn't have the mental understanding that she was breaking the law, doing things. She thought she was doing the right thing. We could argue that. I respect your opinion. I do, Carl, but I don't respect the outcome. And I think that is an atrocious outcome. Again, somebody with no career record, just to say criminal record, and just to say, well, did she commit the crime? Well, say that to Hillary Clinton, but she wasn't prosecuted. But she still committed the crime, in my opinion. Or all those people on the Jeffrey Epstein list that seem to be okay, and society has accepted pedophilia because there's no one being prosecuted, but we know that there was pedophilia and we have all these victims. Why aren't those rights being taken care of? And I don't care if it's Donald Trump or Bill Clinton. I mean, if you committed pedophilia, you should go away for it. It's a crime against society at the most vulnerable state. The innocent, the vulnerable, the minors, the future of society. I mean, just look at this country and say to yourself, is this the best way? The DOJ is working, the police are working, or is there some sort of agenda? Take how people were prosecuted for crack versus cocaine, the racism behind that, because the cocaine were the elite, and the degradation of society were doing crack. It's the same thing. You put some flour on it and you increase the penalty 20 times over. Or people who have career life sentences for marijuana possession. I mean, at some point, we have to look at it as a society and say, compare ourselves to other countries that we always say we are the best of the best. In many ways, we are. But when it comes to locking up people for extremely long sentences for crimes that don't justify that, I mean, I just scratch my head.
So I agree with you. I mean, I personally think that our judicial system is a little on the bias side when it comes to how they prosecute certain individuals. I would argue that I don't think that Tina Peters' case was necessarily politically motivated, but I will grant you that I wasn't in the judge's head when the sentencing was passed
Yeah,
down.
let me stop you there, though, because if you just do your research, look at who the Attorney General of the state of Colorado is, and look at what she did and what she was involved in, and what her political bias is, and who she worked for. And please, just do that research and let me know if you feel that same way. It's just something I have done my own research too, and I don't fault you for not because it's not reported. But just do it, and you'll understand differently.
So I mean, and I will do that research. But to your point, and you're an attorney, so I'm going to ask you a question: Is the attorney general responsible for sentencing, or is the judge responsible for sentencing?
It's the attorney general is responsible for two things here. One, the attorney general can decide who to prosecute, and two, the attorney general can say this person needs to be taken out of the system, and they have the power, I believe, in the state of Colorado to do that.
But isn't it the judge that makes the final judgment call on whether or not the sentencing is where it needs to be? I mean, I've heard
Well, the
of
mistake
multiple
is
incidents.
mistake in that one was that they used to convict her on one of the counts. They charged her for a felony, and they said if you did this, then you're responsible for a felony, and they got it wrong. They misquoted it was a misdemeanor, so the standard was much lower to convict her as a misdemeanor than a felony. But they used the misdemeanor standard and convicted her for a felony. So that was a big part of her sentencing issue. So no, the judge got it wrong here, and that's part of the appeal.
Okay. But there is an appeal that is in the process,
Yeah,
correct?
but she's still the appeal is, but she's been in jail for months now waiting for the verdict. And let's say she was completely the appeal and we asked her to go home. She's a nonviolent. Let her stay at home. She'll wear an ankle bracelet. She'll go back. I mean, if there's enough evidence to support our case, she should have that right. I mean, this is what we call a just society based on fairness. I mean, she's not going to commit another crime. She hasn't committed a crime previous to this, if this is considered a crime. And, you know, by definition, she was convicted of whatever they prosecuted her on. So, yeah, she was convicted of a crime. But was she? Well, that's what the purpose of the appeal is. But why not have civility as a society and say, you know what? It's not like she murdered somebody and there's a family that has to wake up every single day and say, the murderer to my son is on the streets right now pending this appeal. There is no victim here that has suffered um, irreparably that we need to keep the person behind bars here. This is the problem.
Right. And again, you and I can agree that the issue is not necessarily or the issue is not necessarily political in nature. I would argue that the issue is the way that the laws are written, the fact that we have mandatory minimums, the fact that we have strict laws that put nonviolent offenders behind bars for extended periods of time that are atrocious, the fact that we have a varying difference in sentencing based off of class, the fact that there are different people who make judgment calls, who are called judges, who make judgment calls based off of what the law says as far as sentencing goes. So, I mean, I would argue that one of the biggest problems that we have in our justice system is the fact that our prisons are privately run, right? And so they profit off of that, which then in turn goes into the political system. And so these big prison industries, they push money into lobbying, which drives the way that bills are written, the way that laws are written, which causes them to get more prisoners, which causes them to get more money from the government. So, I mean, I'm with you. I do agree that we need to look at that system and figure out how to fix it. So, I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't necessarily disagree with you on everything. And that's the fundamental point of why I started Crambox Politics, right? Is because, we can have differing viewpoints on whether or not there was fraud in the election of 2020. You and I can have diametrically opposing views when it comes to that. You and I can have diametrically opposing views when it comes to how this administration is executing its power under the Constitution. But at the end of the day, there are things that we can agree on, right? And one of the things that I think that has come out of this discussion is the fact that we both agree that our justice system needs to be changed, or at least evaluated and fixed, right? And the way that we prosecute and punish Americans needs to be altered. I think that it is embarrassing that the United States is number one in incarcerated citizens amongst the developed world. So,
By
I mean,
far, a large margin.
it's absolutely embarrassing that is a thing. And so, again, you and I have found that agreement.
And just to agree with that and to say that you could have selective prosecution and decide which people you're going to find, and you have a Department of Justice that has endless resources and a conviction rate over 95%. I think it's close to 97 when it goes to court, right? That's a problem. I mean, you don't have a fair, balanced, free society when you have one side that could put $1 billion towards putting you behind bars, and you're at limited means, then you're paying someone at $800 an hour for your freedom. So your freedom is predicated on, your ability to pay to have adequate counsel. And if you can't, you'll have somebody who's going to handle your case and 150 other cases at the same time. And how's that justice?
It's not at all. And I would argue that again with you that's probably one of the problems is that the judges generally defer to the government lawyers and the government, what's the word that I'm looking for? The government representatives who come into the courthouse to push and prosecute the case. And so counsel, that's the word I was looking for. But I would say that deference is probably one of the biggest issues because it's hard to get over that deference, right? So if a justice comes in and looks at the attorney general and says, hey, I'm going to defer to you as far as judgment calls goes, then what that does is it takes the justice's responsibility to judge on the facts of the case, and puts that in the hands of the prosecutor who's supposed to be presenting the prosecution side of the facts of the case, which is totally absolutely unacceptable in my opinion.
And then you take somebody like Roger Stone and you put him in a DC courtroom where your peers aren't your peers, that there are no Republicans to be found, and you have one that has evidence of complete bias, that she knew about it, pretended she didn't, found out afterwards, and basically said, we don't find that to be problematic to the point where we're gonna, take any action here. They're kangaroo courts now. I mean, because you basically can say, all right, we have somebody who committed a crime in New York, but we're going to prosecute him in DC because we know we're going to win, because we know that a Republican can never get a fair jury in DC. It's an impossibility nowadays. But yet we're going to constantly prosecute them because we have a favorable jury pool.
Well, I would argue that there's no evidence of political affiliation playing a part in the way that an alleged criminal is tried in this country.
Well,
I haven't seen that. I would say that
look at
I
Roger
have not
Stone
seen
as
any
one of
evidence.
many cases. He had no
Well,
chance in hell to be. He was not like, this is one I really like. I'm not supporting Roger Stone. I'm not like saying one thing or another about, his lifestyle, his positions, his decisions, what he says. Just take a look at that case. He got convicted, all Democrats, because he was a Republican. Loud-spoken Republican, and he never had a fair chance, never had a fair chance at all. And then you found out the things that he was convicted of years later did not even happen. But
right.
nobody
So lying to Congress, witness tampering, and obstruction of congressional
He didn't lie to
investigation.
Congress. There was no lying to Congress. They said, we need to tell you about Russian collusion. And he said, there was no Russian collusion, because there wasn't. That wasn't lying to Congress.
And yet he was found guilty by a jury of his peers. And you're saying that
No, no, no.
because
No, no, no. Let me clarify. He was found guilty of a jury of people in Washington, D.C. They weren't his peers, because there were not one of those individuals were his peers. We use that definition, but we had a completely biased jury that were all Democrats, and one was protesting against Roger Stone before she even knew she was on the jury pool.
right, but in a jury selection, do the lawyers for both sides not interview and decide who they want to be on the jury? Is that not how that works?
That evidence didn't come out because it was suppressed, and it was later found out after he was found that he was guilty. And two, when you have a jury pool in the District of Columbia, you don't have any of your peers unless you're on that political side. You could commit or bring up any charges just about, as long as it's a political sided matter, you're going to be found guilty 99.9% of the time. I guarantee you. And I don't want to pretend that and use statistics here falsely, because I don't have evidence to support that statement, but I see it time and again, and it is appalling. I mean, and there's an easy way of handling this. Get them out of D.C. If Roger Stone's going to be found guilty in D.C., why not put him in Texas in a very heavily weighted Republican jury, see what happens? Put him out there in Colorado in a mixed, put him in a pool where he has different group of quote unquote peers and see what happens. I will promise you, you would have different outcomes. You're putting someone's life behind bars for 8 years in that case as well, based upon a group of people in a certain location that if it was charged in a different location, it would be a completely different outcome. And that's what we're fighting for. And it's not about politics. It's about freedom. And I see something that's happening right now that I don't like. And that pendulum's going to swing. It swung when you talk about what Trump's doing this. What about all the things they did to put him behind bars? The federal government said we don't have enough evidence to charge him. The state of New York decides to change the statute of limitations and find some weird analysis that never was tried before to get him found guilty. And now, besides President Trump, we could call him Felon Trump. Okay? This is the problem. And I can't understand why most people that are anti-Trump can't be pro-American and say this is not the America we live. We don't want people that are selectively prosecuted. He was target number one, and we found anything and everything. They tried to go against his children. Everything. They went against his livelihood. They penalized him. They found every single thing. For years, he was in court, civil and criminal. Like, it never ended. For what? For running for office. Granted, you may not like the guy. There's a lot of things that I can understand, but you shouldn't punish the person because you don't like the person and take away everyone else's freedoms, because ultimately we're hurting all of us, because the rightful people that should be in office aren't going to run for office because of the fear now that was instilled left and right. The pendulum just swung. And you started this podcast with what the president was doing, but you forgot to tell the audience what the prior president was doing the whole 4 years that the current president wasn't in office, and how he basically looked the other way, or he enforced it, or he got the federal government involved in the New York prosecution when it should have no place in there. How he had the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, do atrocious things during his administration that were unconscionable, that they were only politically driven. And again, I can argue both sides. I could say Pam Bondi might be doing things that I don't agree with and you don't agree with, but the pendulum's just switched. And this is the problem. I don't want the pendulum constantly switching. I want a country that's based on equality for all, fairness to everyone, and give the American dream back to the people, not the special interests. And when you have groups like Doge that say this exploitation is unnecessary, we should focus on that. And Congress should do something. But Congress is not doing something. So now the executive power, has exceeded all senses of common sense. But for what reason? Simple. Because Congress doesn't do anything. They don't pass any laws. We can't pass a balance a budget. All it is propaganda on both sides, talking points, so that they can get clips, they can sell books. It makes no sense. It makes no sense when you have 50 Democrats and 50 Republicans, and 50 Democrats will always vote maybe within 98% the Democrat line, and the Republicans will vote the Republican line all the time. This is not the country that we should be living in right now. And Congress is not working at all. And the system, and I agree with what you said, I wish there were no parties. Me too, because then you actually have people who have brains that can speak from their heart, not just be forced and compelled to make decisions based on their political agenda.
Well, on that note, I would like to again thank you for coming on the show. I really do sincerely appreciate you coming on the show. This conversation was extremely enlightening, and I did enjoy it. And any point in time, if you want to come back on, let me know, and we'll
Yeah,
bring you
no,
back on.
I appreciate it. I appreciate people on the other side because the only way we can get to resolution is to question what we know. And the only way we can question what we know is to speak with people who have an opposing viewpoint. And I respect that. I respect you. And I respect that you allow me to go on this show. And I probably 90% of your audience disagree with me, but maybe I found one person that didn't.
The
Call it.
important thing is that they heard you, right? And
Correct.
that's the fact of the matter is that as long as we're communicating, things are working. Once we stop communicating, then we're all screwed. So,
Exactly.
but to the listeners, thank you for tuning in, and make sure that you give us a like, follow, and share, and then make sure that you're alerted to our next show. Evan, thanks again.
Thank you.
Stay informed, stay engaged, and always color outside the line.